It was late at night when the city streets were unusually quiet. The glowing street lights stood like silent watchers on the empty road, and the cool breeze carried the faint sound of cars rushing from far away. Most people were already home, resting in the warmth of their beds, but not everyone had such comfort. On that same road, a sleek black car rolled slowly toward a traffic signal, and inside it sat Armin, a well-known CEO whose life seemed perfect to everyone who looked at him. He had money, power, and success. Yet, that night, his eyes were drawn to something far from the world of luxury he was used to. As his car stopped near a bus stop, his gaze landed on a tiny figure curled up on a cold metal bench. At first, he thought it might just be someone waiting for a bus, but then he realized buses didn't run this late at night. His curiosity grew, and he leaned closer to the window. Under the flickering light of the street lamp, he saw her clearly, a little girl, no older than 8 or 9, sleeping with her arms wrapped tightly around a small worn-out backpack. Her clothes were shabby, her shoes looked too small for her feet, and strands of her hair fell across her tired face. She didn't have a blanket to cover herself. Instead, she used her own arms as a shield against the night's chill. Armin felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. He had spent most of his life focused on numbers, meetings, and decisions worth millions of dollars. Every minute of his day was scheduled, and every choice was tied to profits and growth. Yet, in that moment, none of those things mattered. What mattered was that a little girl was out here alone, shivering under the harsh night air, while the rest of the world slept in comfort. He sat there for a moment, torn between stepping out and driving away. A part of him said this wasn't his problem. After all, he had seen countless people struggling on the streets before, and he couldn't save them all. But another part of him, the quieter and softer voice inside, wouldn't let him turn away so easily. He lowered the car window slightly, wanting to hear if she was awake, but all he heard was the faint sound of her breathing as she slept. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Come with me." But she didn't hear him. Armin leaned back in his seat, still watching her. He thought of his own childhood, one not nearly as easy as the life he lived now. His parents had worked hard, and though they provided what they could, there were nights when even he had felt the bite of hunger and the chill of not having enough. Seeing this girl reminded him of those nights, and for the first time in years, he realized how easy it was to forget where he came from. The driver, noticing his silence, asked politely if they should continue driving. Armin hesitated, his eyes still fixed on the little girl. He wanted to wake her, to take her somewhere warm, but another thought held him back. What if she got scared? What if she didn't trust him? After all, to her, he would just be a stranger. So, with a heavy heart, he told the driver to move. As the car pulled away, he looked back at the girl until the bus stop disappeared from sight. The rest of the night, he couldn't shake the image of her small, fragile body lying on that cold bench. He reached home, a grand mansion filled with expensive furniture and warm lights, but none of it gave him peace. He lay awake in his comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind restless. He thought about her again and again. Who was she? Why was she alone? Did she have a family? Questions filled his head, but there were no answers. He wondered how long she had been living like this and if anyone else had noticed her. Sleep refused to come. His heart felt heavy, and he realized that for all his wealth, he had never felt this powerless before. Money could buy him anything: cars, houses, even businesses, but could it buy safety and love for a child who had none? He turned on his side, trying to close his eyes, but the image of her hugging that little torn backpack wouldn't leave him. It was as if her face had been carved into his memory in just those few moments. By morning, Armin looked tired, but his mind was clear. He knew he couldn't just forget her like another passing scene. Something inside told him that this wasn't just a random encounter, it was a call for him to do something, to change something. He got dressed, skipped his usual breakfast, and told his driver to take him back to the same road, the same bus stop. The driver looked surprised but didn't question him. As the car approached, Armin's eyes searched eagerly, hoping to see her again. But the bench was empty. The spot where she had been lying just last night looked cold and lifeless. His heart sank a little. He stepped out of the car this time, walking closer to the bench as if hoping she would appear. But she wasn't there. He stood still for a long moment, disappointment washing over him. He had come ready to help, but she had vanished. Armin began asking nearby shopkeepers and people passing by if they had seen the girl. Some nodded, saying she often came around and spent nights at the bus stop. Others said they had seen her wandering during the day, sometimes sitting quietly with her backpack, waiting for someone. That word waiting struck him deeply. Waiting for who? Waiting for what? The more he heard, the more restless he became. He wasn't used to mysteries in his life. In business, he always demanded clear answers and quick results. But here, in this simple corner of the city, answers were harder to find. He got back into the car, but his thoughts were no longer about meetings or schedules. They were about a little girl who had somehow shaken the world of a man who thought he already had everything. That night had changed him. He didn't know how or why, but he felt different. The city was still the same, his mansion was still the same, his position as a millionaire CEO was still untouched. But his heart had been touched in a way that no success had ever managed before. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Armin woke up earlier than usual, though he hadn't really slept much. His eyes were tired, but his mind was restless. The first thought that came to him when he opened his eyes was not about his meetings or his company's targets, but about the little girl he had seen at the bus stop. He got ready quickly, his usual calm and slow routine replaced with an unusual urgency. For the first time in years, he skipped reading the morning newspaper and didn't touch the breakfast laid out for him. He simply grabbed his coat and asked his driver to take him back to that same road where he had seen her. The city was waking up slowly. Shops were opening, vendors were preparing their carts, and office workers hurried along the pavements with cups of tea in their hands. The streets, which had been so quiet last night, were now alive with the noise of daily life. But Armin's eyes searched for only one thing. As his car neared the bus stop, his heart beat faster. He leaned forward, staring out the window, hoping she was still there. But when the car slowed down and stopped in front of the bench, his heart dropped. The bench was empty. The girl was nowhere to be seen. The small space where she had curled up last night looked even colder and lonelier in the bright light of day. Armin felt a wave of disappointment rush over him. He had come prepared to help, to speak to her, to maybe offer her food and safety. But she was gone, as if the night had swallowed her and taken her away. He stepped out of the car. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at the empty bench. He touched the cold metal rail of the bus stop as if expecting to find some clue left behind. There was nothing. He looked around, scanning the sidewalks and the shops nearby, but still, there was no sign of her. Determined not to give up, he approached a small tea stall near the bus stop. The man behind the counter looked up, curious about why such a well-dressed gentleman was standing there. Armin politely asked, "Excuse me, do you know the little girl who sometimes sleeps here?" The tea vendor's face softened. "Yes, sir, I've seen her many times." "Poor child. She comes here often, mostly at night. Sometimes she sits quietly during the day, hugging her bag. I give her tea when I can, but she hardly says a word." Armin felt a heaviness in his chest. "Do you know where she goes during the day?" he asked. The man shook his head. "No one knows. She just wanders. Sometimes she disappears for a few hours and then comes back. She doesn't talk to people much." It seems she is waiting for someone. Waiting. Armin repeated, his voice low. Yes, the man replied. She once told a shopkeeper nearby that her mother went away and told her to wait here. So she waits. Day after day. Those words pierced Armin's heart. He imagined that little girl sitting on that cold bench every day, holding on to hope that her mother would return. He felt his throat tighten as he realized how much loneliness and pain those small shoulders were carrying. He thanked the tea vendor and walked a little further down the street. He spoke to a fruit seller, a security guard, and a few other shopkeepers. Each of them had seen her. Some said she had been there for more than a week. Others said they had noticed her much longer. No one really knew her story, but they all felt pity for her. She was like a shadow that had become part of the street, always there, yet unnoticed by most people rushing through their busy lives. Armin returned to his car, deep in thought. He leaned back in his seat, staring out the window as the driver asked if they should head back home. But Armin shook his head. No. Drive slowly. Let me look around. He scanned every corner, every narrow lane, hoping she would appear. But the more he searched, the more he realized how big the city was and how easy it was for a small child to vanish in the crowd. His assistant called him about a meeting he was supposed to attend. Normally, Armin would never miss a meeting, no matter how small. But this time, he simply said, "Cancel it." His assistant was shocked into silence. For Armin, this was unthinkable. But he didn't care. His mind was only on the little girl. Later that day, he asked his driver to return to the same spot again. The bench was still empty. He felt frustrated but not defeated. If she was living on the streets, she couldn't be far. He decided he would keep coming back until he found her. That evening, he called his assistant and gave him a task unlike any other. Find out about the children living around this area, he instructed. Talk to local organizations, shelters, anyone who might know something. I want to know about her. The assistant hesitated. Sir, may I ask, why? Armin's voice softened. Because I saw something yesterday that I can't ignore. I want to help her. The assistant, though surprised, nodded and got to work. Within hours, he came back with a few details. No official records, no relatives known, no address. She was just another nameless child lost in the city. But he confirmed that she often appeared near that bus stop, usually in the evenings, sitting quietly as though waiting for someone. Armin listened carefully, each piece of information painting a clearer picture of her life. She was not simply poor. She was alone. Completely alone. The thought shook him to his core. For the first time in years, he felt helpless. In boardrooms, he was a man of solutions. He made decisions worth millions with confidence and speed. But now, faced with the fragile life of one little girl, he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. That night, Armin returned once again to the bus stop. He sat in his car for a long time, his eyes fixed on the empty bench. The street grew quieter, and one by one, the shops closed. The night air grew colder, and still, there was no sign of her. His driver looked at him through the rear-view mirror, unsure why his boss was waiting in the darkness like this. Finally, just as Armin was about to give up, a small figure appeared in the distance. His heart raced. It was her. She walked slowly, her tiny frame weighed down by her backpack, her steps tired. She reached the bench and carefully sat down, hugging her bag close to her chest. She looked around, as if searching for someone in the crowd, but no one came. Then she curled up just as she had the night before, preparing to sleep under the cold sky. Armin felt his chest tighten again. He wanted to rush out immediately, to tell her she didn't have to live like this anymore. But he stopped himself. He knew trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. He stayed quiet in the car, watching her, his mind already made up. Tomorrow, he would approach her. Tomorrow, he would speak to her. That night, when he returned home, he finally felt a strange sense of relief. At least now he knew where she was, and he knew she was real, not just a fleeting image haunting his mind. But along with the relief came a new responsibility. He could not turn away anymore. Something inside him had shifted. This little girl, who had nothing, had become the most important thought in the mind of a man who had everything. And deep down, he knew this was just the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. The next evening, Armin returned to the bus stop earlier than usual. All day, his mind had been restless, filled with thoughts of the little girl. His meetings had felt like distractions, and even when people spoke to him, he found himself nodding without really hearing. He wanted the hours to pass quickly so he could see her again. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the city in shades of orange and gold, he left his office and instructed his driver to head straight to the same road. When they arrived, the streets were still busy. People rushed home, buses honked, and vendors called out their last sales of the day. Armin's eyes searched the crowd, hoping to spot her. His heart jumped when he finally saw a small figure walking slowly toward the bus stop, clutching the same worn-out backpack. She looked tired, as though she had walked for miles. She reached the bench and sat down, pulling her knees close to her chest. For a moment, she looked around, scanning the road, almost as if she was still waiting for someone. Then she lowered her head and held the bag tightly, as if it were the only comfort she had in the world. Armin took a deep breath. He knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. The night before, he had watched her from a distance, but now he couldn't just sit quietly. He gently told his driver to wait, then stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the bench. His footsteps were careful, not wanting to startle her. When he was a few steps away, she lifted her head and looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. They were big, dark, and full of a mixture of fear and curiosity. For a moment, she looked ready to run, but Armin raised his hands slightly in a gesture of peace and spoke softly. "Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you." The little girl didn't reply. She only hugged her backpack tighter, her eyes watching him closely. Armin smiled gently and said, "Are you hungry?" He reached into the small bag he carried and pulled out a packet of warm food he had brought with him, just in case. He held it out toward her, not too close, giving her the choice. At first, she hesitated. Her eyes darted from his face to the food. Then slowly, as if fighting with her own fear, she reached out her small hand and took it. She opened the packet quickly and began eating, her hunger stronger than her suspicion. Armin sat down on the edge of the bench, keeping a little distance so she would feel safe. He watched her silently for a few minutes as she ate, realizing how small and fragile she looked under the streetlight. After she finished, he asked softly, "What's your name?" She paused, her eyes dropping to the ground. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, she said, "Aisha." "Aisha," Armin repeated gently, as if the name itself carried weight. "That's a beautiful name." For the first time, a faint flicker of a smile crossed her lips, though it vanished quickly. She looked down again, still unsure. Armin wanted to ask more, but he knew he had to move slowly. Children who lived like this often carried deep scars, and trust was something fragile. He pointed toward his car parked nearby. "I can take you somewhere safe tonight. A place where it's warm, where you can sleep on a bed instead of this bench. Would you like that?" Immediately, she shook her head. Fear flashed in her eyes, and she hugged her backpack tightly again. Her whole body seemed to tense, as though she was preparing to run away if he came closer. Armin quickly raised his hands again, his voice calm. "It's okay. I understand. You don't have to come if you don't want to. You're safe here with me just talking. He sat back quietly, giving her space. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the sound of passing cars and the wind rustling through the trees. Armin didn't push her. Instead, he waited patiently, hoping she would feel his sincerity. After a while, Aisha's shoulders relaxed slightly. She asked in a small voice, "Why are you here?" The question caught him off guard. He thought for a moment before answering honestly. "Because I saw you, and I couldn't stop thinking about you. I don't want you to be alone out here. No child should be sleeping on a bench." Her eyes searched his face carefully, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then she lowered her gaze again and whispered, "Mama told me to wait here. She said she would come back." Armin felt his heart ache. He wanted to tell her that maybe her mother wasn't coming back, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. The hope in her voice was too fragile to break. Instead, he simply said, "I understand. But until she comes back, can I help you? Can I make sure you have food and a safe place to rest?" Aisha didn't answer right away. She sat quietly, playing with the strap of her bag, her small hands trembling slightly. Finally, she gave the faintest nod. Armin smiled softly, his heart filling with relief. "Thank you for trusting me, even a little." He stood up slowly and held out his hand, not forcing, just offering. "Come with me." Aisha looked at his hand for a long moment. Then, clutching her backpack, she stood up. She didn't take his hand, but she followed him cautiously toward the car. Armin opened the door gently and let her climb in. She sat nervously on the edge of the seat, her eyes darting around the luxurious interior, unsure if she belonged there. On the way, Armin spoke softly to her about simple things: the lights of the city, the shops they passed, the cool air outside. He didn't ask heavy questions, only wanted her to feel calm. Slowly, her rigid posture softened, though her backpack never left her lap. They reached a small shelter he had arranged earlier through one of his contacts. It was a clean, warm place with caretakers who looked after children in need. Armin introduced Aisha gently, staying close to make sure she felt safe. He showed her the room prepared for her: a simple bed with fresh sheets, a blanket, and a small lamp by the side. Aisha stood at the doorway, wide-eyed. For her, this small room looked like a dream. She stepped inside slowly, as if afraid it might vanish. She placed her backpack carefully on the bed, then sat down, her tiny hands running over the blanket. For the first time, she looked up at Armin with something different in her eyes: not just fear, but a faint glimmer of gratitude. Armin smiled warmly. "This is your bed now. You can rest here tonight. No one will bother you. You are safe." Aisha nodded silently, her lips trembling as though she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Instead, she hugged her backpack tightly and lay down on the bed. Her small body sank into the softness, and a sigh escaped her lips. Armin stood quietly at the door, watching her. He felt a deep wave of emotion wash over him. He had closed many business deals in his life, won countless victories in his career, but nothing had ever touched him like this moment. Seeing a child who had known nothing but cold benches finally resting in warmth, it made him feel something money could never buy. Before leaving, he whispered softly, almost like a promise, "Good night, Aisha. You are safe now." As he walked out of the shelter, his heart felt lighter. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits or success. He was thinking about a little girl who had begun to change his world in ways he hadn't imagined. And deep down, he knew this was only the first step. Tomorrow, he would return. Tomorrow, he would make sure her smile grew stronger. Tomorrow, he would show her that she wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Armin woke up earlier than usual, and this time, his heart felt lighter. It was the first morning in a long time when he didn't open his laptop immediately or think about meetings as soon as he got out of bed. Instead, his mind was filled with the image of Aisha lying peacefully on the small bed at the shelter. He kept replaying her faint smile in his head, the way her tired little body had finally found rest. That image was more valuable to him than any deal he had ever signed. As he ate a quick breakfast, something unusual happened. Normally, he never noticed the taste of his food because he was always too busy reading reports or checking his phone. But today, he paused. He actually tasted the bread, the tea, and realized how simple things could bring comfort. He thought of Aisha again. If such a simple meal could give him comfort, how much joy would it bring her to eat without worrying where her next bite would come from? He decided to visit her after finishing his most urgent work. In the office, his staff noticed something different about him. He was calmer, more patient, and even smiled more often. People whispered about how the usually serious CEO seemed softer somehow. But Armin didn't explain. He kept Aisha's story close to his heart, as though it was a secret bond between them. By evening, he drove back to the shelter. When he entered, he saw Aisha sitting at a table with a caretaker, drawing with some crayons. Her little hand moved slowly across the paper, making crooked shapes and lines. The moment she noticed him, her eyes lit up, though she quickly tried to hide her smile. Armin felt warmth spread through him. He walked over and asked gently, "What are you drawing?" Aisha held up the paper shyly. It was a picture of a house, a tree beside it, and two stick figures standing outside. One was taller, one smaller. The lines were rough, but the meaning was clear. Armin's throat tightened. "That's beautiful," he said softly. "Is that you in the picture?" She nodded, pointing to the smaller figure. Then, after a pause, she pointed to the taller one. "Mama," she whispered. Armin smiled gently, hiding the ache he felt in his chest. He didn't want to shatter her hope, but he also wanted her to know she wasn't alone anymore. "It's a lovely drawing," he said, patting her head lightly. "Maybe one day you'll draw more people standing beside you." Aisha tilted her head curiously but didn't reply. She simply went back to coloring, this time with more energy. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Aisha's life began to change. She started attending school with the help of the shelter. At first, she was nervous and clung to her backpack, afraid of leaving it behind. But with gentle encouragement, she began opening up little by little. She learned new words, played with other children, and even laughed sometimes. Each small step felt like a victory. Armin visited often. He would bring books, clothes, and sometimes toys, though Aisha never seemed too interested in toys. What she wanted most was time. She wanted him to sit beside her, listen to her stories, and sometimes just be there in silence. Armin realized something important: children don't only need material things, they need love, patience, and someone who truly cares. One evening, after reading her a storybook, Armin asked, "Do you like school?" Aisha nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes. I like drawing. And reading. Teacher says I am good." Armin smiled proudly. "I knew you would be. You are very smart." For a moment, she looked at him thoughtfully. Then she asked a question that caught him off guard. "Why do you come to see me?" He paused. It was such a simple question, yet so deep. He could have said many things, but he chose honesty. "Because when I saw you that night at the bus stop, I felt something I couldn't ignore. I wanted to make sure you were safe. And now I like being here because you make me happy." Aisha's small face softened, and this time she didn't hide her smile. She whispered quietly, "You make me happy too." Those words stayed with Armin long after he left the shelter that night. They echoed in his mind as he drove back home, filling him with a sense of peace he had never known. As the weeks passed, Armin found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. He began leaving work earlier, something his employees had never seen before. He cancelled late-night meetings just so he could read Aisha a bedtime story. He even started turning down some high-paying contracts because they required constant travel, and he didn't want to miss his time with her. His friends and colleagues were puzzled. Some asked him why he was suddenly living so differently. But Armin only smiled. He didn't feel the need to explain. The truth was simple: for the first time in years, he felt alive. His life had meaning beyond money and success. Meanwhile, Aisha continued to blossom. Her laughter became brighter, her drawings more colorful, and her words more confident. She still carried her backpack everywhere, but now it wasn't out of fear, it was more like a habit she hadn't let go of yet. She began calling Armin uncle whenever she spoke to him. The first time she said it, his heart melted. He had been called many things in his life: sir, boss, CEO, but uncle carried more love than all of them combined. One day, while they were sitting in the shelter garden, she looked at him with innocent eyes and asked, "Uncle, will you go away like Mama did?" The question broke him inside. He wanted to promise her instantly that he would never leave, but he also knew promises are heavy. Still, he couldn't let her fear stay unanswered. He took her small hand in his and said gently, "No, Aisha. I will always be here for you." She studied his face carefully, as though searching for any sign of doubt. Then she nodded, her little heart finally believing him. From that moment on, her trust in him deepened. Armin, on his part, began thinking of bigger steps. It wasn't enough just to visit her and provide food or school. He wanted her to truly feel she belonged somewhere, not just in a shelter but in a family. Slowly, the thought of adoption grew stronger in his heart. He wasn't sure how she would feel about it, but he knew one thing: his life without her now felt incomplete. The transformation in Armin didn't go unnoticed. His employees said he looked healthier, calmer, and kinder. People who once feared his strict personality now saw a softer side. Even his business improved in surprising ways. Clients appreciated his sincerity, and workers felt more valued. It was as though the kindness he was giving to Aisha was flowing into every part of his life. But above all, the greatest change was in his own heart. He no longer felt the loneliness that often haunted him in his large, empty mansion. When he came back from seeing Aisha, the silence of his home didn't feel heavy anymore. Instead, it felt like a place waiting for laughter and footsteps, a place waiting for her. As the days passed, Armin began to plan a future not just for himself, but for Aisha too. A future where she wouldn't just survive, but truly live. A future where she would never have to sleep on a bench again. And though he didn't say it out loud yet, in his heart, he had already made a decision. One day soon, Aisha would no longer just call him uncle. She would call him something far more precious. Months passed, and what had once been a chance encounter at a lonely bus stop had now turned into something far greater than Armin had ever imagined. Every day, he watched Aisha grow a little more confident, a little happier. Her laughter filled the shelter, and her smile became brighter than the lights of his office towers. She no longer looked like the frightened little girl clutching a torn backpack at night. She was still small, still fragile in many ways, but there was a spark in her now, a spark of hope. Armin had kept his promise. He visited her regularly, made sure she never missed a meal, and encouraged her at school. But somewhere in his heart, he knew it was not enough. He couldn't bear the thought of her returning to an uncertain future, always wondering if she truly belonged. He wanted her to feel safe every single day, not just when he was around. He wanted her to know what it felt like to have a family, to have someone she could always run to. One evening, after reading her a story at the shelter, Armin stayed a little longer. Aisha was sitting cross-legged on her bed, holding a drawing she had made. She showed it to him proudly. It was another picture of a house, but this time there were two figures in front. One was small, with long hair tied in a simple ponytail. The other was taller, with short hair and a suit drawn in clumsy lines. Above them, she had written in uneven letters, "Me and Uncle." Armin stared at the drawing for a long time, his heart swelling with emotions he could barely describe. He looked at her and asked softly, "Do you like calling me Uncle?" She nodded quickly, smiling. "Yes. Because you are always here." Then her expression grew serious. "Uncle, will I stay here forever? Or will I go back to waiting at the bus stop one day?" Her innocent question shook him to the core. He couldn't let her carry that fear anymore. He leaned closer, his voice firm yet gentle. "No, Aisha. You will never have to go back there. I will make sure you always have a home." She blinked at him, her eyes wide. "With you," she whispered. Armin nodded. "With me." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then slowly, she crawled closer and hugged him tightly. It was the first time she had taken the step herself, without fear, without hesitation. His arms wrapped around her, and in that embrace, he felt a bond stronger than any contract he had ever signed. It was not written on paper, but it was sealed in their hearts. The next few weeks were filled with new steps. Armin began the process of adoption. It was not easy. There were papers, meetings, and procedures. But for a man who had built an empire from scratch, no challenge felt too big. He met with social workers, explained his intentions, and went through every requirement with patience. Some people were surprised that a busy, wealthy CEO would want to take such responsibility, but Armin didn't care about opinions. For him, Aisha was not a responsibility, she was family. Finally, the day came when the papers were complete, and the shelter officially handed Aisha into his care. That morning, Armin drove to the shelter with more excitement than he had ever felt before. When he walked in, Aisha ran up to him with her backpack still clutched tightly, though now it looked almost too small for her growing frame. "Are we really going home today?" she asked eagerly. Armin knelt down, smiling as he brushed her hair away from her face. "Yes, Aisha. Today you come home with me." Her eyes sparkled, and for the first time in a long while, she laughed freely, the sound like music to his ears. When they reached his mansion, Aisha stood at the gate, her mouth open in awe. The tall walls, the wide driveway, the grand building, it was unlike anything she had ever seen. She held onto his hand tightly as if afraid she might get lost inside such a big place. But Armin leaned down and whispered, "This is your home now. Every room here belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." He showed her around, from the living room to the kitchen, to a bedroom he had specially prepared for her. It was painted in soft colors, with shelves for books, a desk for studying, and a bed with a cozy blanket. On the table by the window, there were new crayons and sketchbooks waiting for her. Aisha stood in the middle of the room, her backpack still on her shoulders, and looked around as though she couldn't believe it was real. Then she slowly placed her bag on the bed and touched the soft blanket with her hands. She turned to Armin and whispered, "Uncle, this is really for me." He smiled warmly. "Yes, Aisha. This is yours. Forever." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She ran to him and hugged him tightly, her little arms around his waist. Armin felt his own eyes grow wet. For all his wealth, he had never experienced such pure happiness until this moment. From that day onward, their lives changed completely. The mansion, once quiet and empty, was now filled with the sound of small footsteps running through hallways, the chatter of a child asking endless questions, and the soft hum of laughter. Aisha decorated her walls with her drawings, filling the house with colors. She would wait for Armin to return from work and run to greet him at the door. Sometimes she would show him her schoolwork proudly, and other times she would simply sit by his side while he read or worked, just to be near him. Armin, too, changed even more. He no longer worked late into the night. He made time to cook simple meals with her, to help with her homework, and to tell her bedtime stories. The mansion no longer felt like a castle of glass and stone, it felt like a home. Soon, Aisha stopped calling him uncle. One evening, as they sat in the garden watching the sunset, she leaned against his arm and whispered softly, "Papa." Armin froze for a moment, his heart overwhelmed. Then he hugged her close, whispering, "Yes, Aisha. I am your papa." That one word was worth more to him than all the titles he had ever held in his life. But Armin didn't stop with Aisha. Her story had opened his eyes to a world he had ignored for too long. He decided to do more, not just for her, but for other children like her. He used his wealth and influence to start a foundation for abandoned and homeless children. He set up shelters, schools, and programs to give them opportunities and safety. He personally visited these places, talking to children, listening to their stories, and making sure they knew they mattered. People admired him for his generosity, and the media praised his actions. But when journalists asked him why he had started this mission, his answer was always simple. "Because one night, I saw a little girl sleeping at a bus stop, and she changed my life." And indeed, his life had changed forever. Aisha was no longer the girl waiting at a bus stop. She was his daughter, his pride, and his greatest joy. Together, they built a new life, one filled with love, laughter, and hope. Years later, whenever Armin looked at her, he still remembered the first night he saw her curled up on that bench. But now, instead of sadness, he felt gratitude. Gratitude that fate had brought them together, that he had listened to his heart that night, and that three simple words, "Come with me," had created a bond that nothing could break. The millionaire who once lived only for success had discovered the true meaning of wealth. And the little girl who once had nothing had found everything she had ever dreamed of: a family, a home, and someone who would never let her go.